Millionaire invites ex-wife to humiliate her. But she arrives in a Ferrari with the twins and stuns everyone. Years ago, he kicked her out while pregnant and with nothing, believing he'd never hear from her again. Now, about to marry someone else, he sends an invitation just to prove he has won. But on the big day, she arrives in a Ferrari, flawless, with the children he denied. And without saying a word, she shows that true power is silent and unforgettable. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing. A fine rain was falling on the narrow streets of the South Bronx in New York City when Marianne met Andrew. It was one of those grey June days where the cold seems to penetrate not only the body but also the soul of those who live with little. She was coming back from college, carrying a worn-out backpack and the weariness of someone juggling studies with 2 jobs. He was walking in the opposite direction, with hurried steps, and an expression that mixed determination and restlessness. The encounter happened on the corner by John's Bakery, when Marianne stumbled on a loose paving stone and nearly dropped her books into a puddle of water. Andrew was quick. He caught the notebooks before they touched the wet ground, and, for the first time in months, he smiled. A genuine smile born from the depths of a place he thought he had forgotten. In that moment, something sparked between them. A silent connection, the kind that doesn't need elaborate words or grand promises, just the harmony of 2 hearts that knew. Well, the weight of the daily struggle, the bitter taste of scarcity, and the stubborn dream of a different future. Marianne was 22 and studying business administration at a public university. She was a young woman with an easy smile, expressive eyes, and a natural kindness that overflowed in every gesture. She had grown up watching her mother take in laundry and her father work as a bricklayer, and she had learned from a young age that dignity has no price. Her beauty was simple, without artifice, but she carried her own light that drew attention wherever she went. Andrew, on the other hand, was 25 and had just landed a position as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized company in the Midtown Manhattan area. He came from a family even more humble than Marianne's. His father had left when he was a child, and his mother, Celia, supported the household as a housekeeper. The apartment where they lived was small, with leaks in the walls and a shower that only ran cold. But there was also love, stories told before bedtime, and the aroma of brewed coffee that made the mornings more bearable. Life had not been generous to Andrew, but it had given him something valuable, an insatiable hunger for change. He would watch the men in suits entering the mirrored buildings of Midtown and feel a mixture of admiration and resentment. He wanted to be like them, but at the same time, he despised everything they represented. This contradiction followed him like a shadow. In the first few months, Andrew and Marianne built something beautiful. Walks in Central Park on Sundays, endless conversations about dreams and plans, shared laughter over cheap sandwiches bought at a corner deli. She saw in him a hard-working, determined man who fought to succeed in life without losing his essence. He saw in her a safe harbor, someone who accepted him with his scars and his fears. They married 2 years later, in a simple ceremony at City Hall, with only their families present. The party was at Marianne's mother's house with homemade cake, snacks made by the neighbors, and music playing on an old radio. It was a day of genuine joy, without luxuries, but filled with true affection. That night, sleeping in each other's arms in the small room they rented in Astoria, Queens, they dreamed together of a future, full of achievements. But life has its winding paths, and love is not always enough to hold back the transformations that happen within a person. Andrew began to climb the ladder at his company. His sharp intelligence and his ability to learn quickly caught the attention of his superiors. In less than a year, he was promoted to analyst, then coordinator. Each step up brought not only a better salary, but also a new social circle, new codes of conduct, and new implicit demands. It was at a company holiday party, held at a 5-star hotel on the Upper East Side, that Andrew first felt the weight of judgment. Marianne was by his side, wearing a simple dress she had bought at a department store. She was beautiful, as always, but Andrew couldn't stop comparing his wife to the wives of the executives present. Understated jewelry, impeccable hair, conversations about international travel and expensive wines. During dinner, one of the directors made a joke about local neighborhood league soccer, and Andrew laughed along forcedly. Marianne commented innocently that she loved watching the neighborhood team's games on Sundays. The silence that followed was awkward. The laughter ceased. Glances were exchanged with a silent complicity, as if everyone shared the same thought. She doesn't belong here. Andrew felt something break inside him that night. It wasn't an abrupt rupture, but the beginning of a crack that would only grow with time. He began to see Marianne through different eyes. Her spontaneous gestures, which once charmed him, now irritated him. The way she spoke, the clothes she chose, even the way she held her fork, became a reason for veiled criticism. Marianne felt the change, but she couldn't understand where it was coming from. She tried to adapt, to read more, to observe how the other women behaved, but nothing seemed to be enough. The harder she tried, the more Andrew distanced himself. He spent more and more time at the office, came home late, spoke less, and avoided her gaze. The months dragged on in this climate of growing discomfort. Andrew threw himself into his work, accumulating overtime and taking on increasingly complex projects. His name began to circulate among the top executives as a rising star. He was dedicated, ambitious, willing to do whatever it took to reach the top. But at home, silence settled in like an unwanted guest. Conversations were reduced to the basic, the necessary. Marianne tried to reignite the flame of their relationship, preparing special dinners, suggesting outings, but Andrew always had an excuse. He was tired, had an important meeting the next day, needed to review a report. It was on one of those cold July nights with the typical New York drizzle falling outside that Marianne discovered she was pregnant. The test result trembled in her hands as she sat on the edge of the bed. She felt a mix of joy and fear. Joy because she had always dreamed of being a mother, fear because she sensed that this news would not be received as she hoped. She prepared a special dinner that night. She bought a scented candle, set the table with the placemats they received as a wedding gift, and waited. Andrew arrived at 10 o'clock, carrying a briefcase full of documents and that air of someone who is always thinking about something more important. Marianne served dinner in silence, watching his every move. When she finally gathered her courage, her words came out trembling, laden with a fragile hope. "I'm pregnant, Andrew." He stopped chewing. He slowly placed his fork on the plate and looked up at her. What Marianne saw in his eyes froze her to the core. There was no happiness, no joyful surprise. There was only a calculated coldness, as if she had just announced a business problem that needed to be solved. "What?" His voice came out low, controlled, but charged with something Marianne had never heard before, a hardness that made her heart ache. "I'm pregnant, Andrew. We're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Andrew got up from the table, walked to the window and stood there, his back to her, looking at the city below. The illuminated buildings, the lights of the cars on the avenue, all that pulsating life that seemed so distant from the small apartment where they lived. "Marianne, I can't have a child right now." The words fell on her like stones. "I can't." As if it were a simple choice, a matter of convenience. "What do you mean you can't?" "It's already happening, Andrew. We're going to be parents." He turned, and for the first time in all those years, Marianne saw a stranger in front of her. The eyes that once looked at her with tenderness were now empty, distant. "I'm building my career, Marianne. I have a real chance of becoming a manager in the next few months. A child right now will mess everything up. It will tie me down. It will stop me from focusing on what's important." "And me? Aren't we important?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Andrew looked away, as if her very presence bothered him. The weeks that followed were a nightmare. Andrew became even more absent, colder. He avoided touching Marianne, slept facing the opposite side of the bed, left earlier and earlier, and came back, later and later. She tried to talk, tried to make him understand, but it was like talking to a wall. Her belly began to grow, still shy but present. Marianne felt morning sickness, fatigue, but had no one to share these small experiences with. Her mother had passed away a few years earlier, and she didn't want to worry her father, who already carried his own burdens. She felt profoundly alone. It was on a September afternoon, with the sun shining brightly outside, in cruel contrast to the darkness that filled the apartment, that Andrew arrived with a determined expression. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness. It was something worse, indifference. Marianne was on the sofa reading a book about pregnancy she had borrowed from the neighborhood library. She looked up when she heard him come in and felt a shiver run down her spine. "We need to talk," he said, dropping his briefcase on the floor and sitting in the armchair across from her. The distance between them had never seemed so great, though they were only a few feet apart. Marianne closed the book slowly, feeling her heart race. Something in his voice, in the way he avoided her gaze, told her that this moment would change everything. "I don't want to continue this marriage." The words came out just like that, direct, without preambles or elaborate justifications. Marianne felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her feet. She remained silent, trying to process what she had just heard. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious, Marianne. This isn't working. We're from different worlds. I'm going somewhere you can't follow me." She felt tears burn her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet, not in front of him. "It's because of the baby, isn't it? You're leaving me because I'm having your child. It's not just about that, it's about everything, about who you are, about who I've become. We don't fit anymore." The cruelty of those words cut deeper than any shout or fight could have. It was the complete, absolute rejection of everything she was and represented. "I loved you, Andrew. I still love you. How can you do this?" He finally looked at her, and in that gaze, Marianne saw the naked truth. He felt nothing. The man she had known, who had made her laugh, who had promised to be by her side, had disappeared. In his place, there was only a stranger obsessed with an image of success that didn't include a humble wife and an unwanted child. "You're going to have to leave. I'll give you 1 month to find another place. After that, I want the keys back." Marianne felt something break inside her. It wasn't just her heart. It was her trust in humanity, her faith in love, the belief that people don't abandon those who need them most. She stood up slowly, placing a hand on the belly that was beginning to round. She looked at Andrew one last time, memorizing every feature of that face she once loved, and said with a voice that surprised them both with its firmness, "You're going to regret this one day, Andrew. Not me, but becoming this man I don't even recognize anymore." She left the apartment without looking back. She walked through the streets of Astoria, the tears finally streaming freely down her face. The city continued its indifferent routine. People hurried past, buses honked, street vendors shouted their offers. Life went on, oblivious to the silent collapse of a world. In the following days, Marianne packed her things with a calmness that surprised even herself. She folded her clothes carefully, wrapped the few objects that had sentimental value, and set aside the books she loved most. She did it all alone in silence, while Andrew avoided being at home. On the last day of the month, with 2 heavy suitcases and a backpack, she left the apartment. There was nothing more to say, no farewell to be made. Andrew wasn't there to see her leave, and perhaps it was better that way. She took a bus to her father's house in the South Bronx. The journey seemed endless, each jolt of the bus echoing the pain she felt inside. She looked out the fogged window and saw the city she loved so much pass before her eyes. New York, with its cruel immensity and its empty promises. New York, which swallowed people and spat out broken dreams. When she got off the bus, the rain had returned. Fine, persistent, slowly soaking everything. She walked the 3 blocks to her father's house, carrying the heavy suitcases, feeling each step like a small defeat. But at the same time, something inside her refused to give up completely. Her father, Oswald, opened the door and asked no questions. He just hugged her, letting her cry on his shoulder, like she hadn't cried since she was a child. There, in that tight embrace, Marianne allowed herself to feel everything: the pain of rejection, the anger of betrayal, the fear of an uncertain future, but also a determination that was beginning to sprout somewhere deep in her soul. That night, lying in the room that had been hers throughout her adolescence, with her hand on her belly and her eyes fixed on the ceiling full of damp stains, Marianne made a silent promise. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she would prove to herself and to the world that she was worth so much more than Andrew would ever be able to see. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the streets, cleansing the city, while inside her something new was beginning to grow. It wasn't just the baby developing in her womb. It was a strength she didn't even know she possessed, a resilience that would be tested in every possible way, but that would never let itself be completely broken. Because Marianne had learned on that cold and lonely night that some defeats are just the prologue to a much bigger story, and hers was just beginning. The first few months at her father's house were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. Marianne would wake up every morning before sunrise, when the city was still asleep and only the birds announced the new day. She would place her hand on her belly, which grew week by week, and whisper to the life forming inside. She told it about her dreams, about the world outside, about how they would make everything work out together. Oswald was a man of few words but immense gestures. Every morning before leaving for his construction job, he would leave a note on the kitchen table with simple messages that warmed Marianne's heart. "You're stronger than you think," one said. "This grandchild will have the best mother in the world," said another. He never mentioned Andrew, never asked questions about what had happened. He just offered his silent, comforting presence. Marianne needed to work. The pregnancy wouldn't pay the bills, and she refused to be a burden to her father, who already lived on so little. She found 3 part-time jobs she could juggle with her pregnancy. In the mornings, she helped at a local preschool as an administrative assistant. In the afternoons, she did basic accounting for 2 small neighborhood stores. At night, when she returned home exhausted, she would still take on typing jobs she could do remotely. The hours blurred into a relentless routine, waking up at 5 in the morning, a quick coffee, 2 buses to the school, working from 7 to noon, dealing with parents, organizing documents, helping wherever needed. Then a 15-minute walk under the strong New York sun to the first store, where she stayed, until 4 in the afternoon, entering invoices into the system and doing monthly balances. 2 more buses to the second store, where she stayed until 7, and then finally the journey home, where she still had to meet deadlines for the typing jobs. The fatigue was constant, an unwelcome companion that weighed on her shoulders and blurred her vision. But Marianne discovered she had a resilience within her she never knew existed. Every time she felt like giving up, she would place a hand on her belly and remember she wasn't alone. Someone was depending on her, counting on her, growing inside her. And that was enough to keep going. It was during these months of intense work that something unexpected happened. At the second store where she worked, a small hardware store that was struggling financially, the owner, Walter, asked for her help with a problem. The books weren't balancing. He was sure he was selling well, but the money was simply disappearing. Suppliers were demanding payment, employees needed to be paid, and he couldn't figure out where the error was. Marianne agreed to take a closer look. She took the documents home, spread everything out on the kitchen table, and began to analyze. What should have been a task of a few hours turned into a 3-day investigation. She cross-referenced invoices, compared income and expenses, identified buying and selling patterns. And then, in the early hours of one sleepless morning, she found the problem. There was a subtle leak in the payments to a specific supplier, small, almost imperceptible amounts that, when added up over the months, represented a significant sum. It wasn't intentional fraud, but a series of administrative errors and duplicate charges that no one had noticed. Marianne organized everything into a detailed report, with simple but effective charts showing exactly where the money was being lost and how to fix the problem. When she handed the document to Walter, he was silent for long minutes, reading each page with growing attention. Then he looked up at her, and Marianne saw something she hadn't seen in a long time, genuine admiration. "You have a special talent, kid. This is the work of a specialist. Where did you learn this?" Marianne was surprised by the question. She hadn't learned it anywhere specific. It was just a natural ability, an intuitive way of seeing patterns and connections that she had always had but had never valued. In college, her professors praised her analytical skills, but she always thought it was just effort and dedication. Now, realizing the real impact her work had made, she began to see her own worth differently. Walter didn't just thank her. He paid her an extra amount for the work and, more importantly, started spreading the word. He knew other local business owners who were facing similar problems. Within a few weeks, Marianne was being sought out by owners of small businesses who needed help with their finances. The money started coming in more consistently. It wasn't much, but it was honest and the fruit of her own talent. Marianne felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in a long time. Every problem she solved, every business she helped recover, was proof that she had her own value, independent of any man or situation. The birth happened on a rainy February afternoon, when the muggy New York heat gave way to a sudden, violent storm. The contractions started while she was at the school, organizing enrollments for the next school year. The pain came in waves, increasingly intense, until one of the teachers noticed and insisted on taking her to the hospital. In the small public hospital in the area, between peeling walls and crowded corridors, Marianne gave birth to 2 boys, twins. The surprise of the discovery mixed with the overwhelming joy of finally holding her sons in her arms. They were small, fragile, but full of life. She looked at their wrinkled little faces and felt a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. She named them Gabriel and Raphael. 2 angels, she thought, sent to give meaning to everything she had been through. The first few weeks with the babies were exhausting in a way she could never have imagined. Breastfeeding every 2 hours, diapers to change, simultaneous crying in the middle of the night, sleepless nights. Her father helped as much as he could, taking one of the babies when he got home from work, rocking him while she took care of the other. But the responsibility was hers, and Marianne felt the weight of every decision, every choice. She could no longer work in 3 places with the babies being so small. She had to make difficult choices. She kept only the job at the school, which offered some flexibility, and focused on the financial consulting she could do from home. It was risky to depend on something so uncertain, but it was what she had. The following months were a constant lesson in endurance. Gabriel was a calm baby who slept well and fed without problems. Raphael, however, was different. He cried a lot, had trouble feeding, and Marianne noticed that he didn't react to sounds the same way his brother did. The worry began to grow, a constant shadow in her thoughts. At 6 months, after several visits to the local clinic and a long wait, the diagnosis came. Raphael had significant hearing loss. He would need specialized care, hearing aids when he grew a little older, and speech therapy. The doctor explained everything in that professional, distant voice, but Marianne could barely process the words. She saw only her small, helpless son, who would have another battle to fight in a life that was already starting out difficult. That night, after putting the boys to sleep, Marianne sat on the kitchen floor and finally allowed herself to cry all the tears she had been holding back for months. She cried for the loneliness, for the exhaustion, for the injustice of it all. But more than that, she cried for the son who would face challenges she barely knew how to help him overcome. Oswald found her there, sitting on the floor with her knees bent and her face hidden in her arms. He sat down beside her in silence and waited. When she was finally able to speak, her voice came out broken. "I don't know if I can handle this, Dad. It's all so hard." The old man held her hand with those calloused palms of someone who had worked his whole life, with his own hands. "You've handled everything so far, daughter. You'll handle this too. You don't see it, but you're the strongest person I know." Her father's simple words were like a balm. Marianne wiped her tears, got up from the floor, and decided she would no longer allow herself those moments of weakness. She had 2 sons who depended on her. One of them would need special care, and she would do whatever it took to ensure they both had every possible opportunity. It was thus, pushed by necessity and driven by a fierce maternal love, that Marianne began to grow professionally in a more structured way. The financial consulting she did for small neighborhood businesses began to bear fruit beyond immediate cash. Her reputation spread. One client recommended another, who recommended another. One day, she received an unexpected call. It was from a mid-sized businessman, the owner of a chain of pharmacies in Queens. He had heard about her through Walter and was facing a serious crisis. The company was on the brink of bankruptcy, with accumulated debts and chaotic cash flow. He had already consulted 2 large consulting firms, which charged fortunes and delivered generic reports that solved nothing. Marianne hesitated. It was a much bigger challenge than anything she had ever done before, but something inside her, that same strength that kept her standing every day, told her to accept. She worked on that project for 2 intense months. The boys had just turned 1, and she divided her hours between caring for them and diving into the company's numbers. She analyzed every invoice, every contract, every transaction. She identified operational bottlenecks, overpriced suppliers, and hidden waste in seemingly efficient processes. But she didn't stop there. Marianne went beyond the numbers. She visited the stores in person, talked to employees, observed customer flow, and understood the competition. She realized the problem wasn't just financial, but structural. The company was trying to compete in a saturated market using the same old strategies. Her final report was unlike anything the businessman had ever seen. It wasn't just a list of cuts or generic recommendations. It was a complete restructuring plan with clear steps, measurable goals, and a long-term strategic vision. It included suggestions to improve the customer experience, optimize inventory, renegotiate contracts, and even close non-viable stores. When she submitted the work, the businessman, a man in his 50s named Mr. Henry, read it all in silence. Marianne was nervous, sitting across the table, trying to interpret every expression that crossed his face. Finally, he closed the document and looked at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Do you have any idea what you've just done here?" Marianne didn't know what to say. She had just done her job to the best of her ability. "This report is worth more than everything I paid those fancy consulting firms for. You didn't just identify the problems. You understood my business in a way no one else could. I want to hire you permanently as a strategic consultant." The offer came with a monthly salary that made Marianne's eyes widen. It was more than she earned in a whole year with all her jobs combined. But more important than the money was the recognition. Someone saw real value in what she did, not out of pity or charity, but on genuine merit. She accepted the offer, and in the following months proved she deserved every penny. The pharmacy chain began to recover. The changes she suggested were implemented gradually, and the results appeared. In 6 months, the company was out of the red. In a year, it was profitable again. Mr. Henry was so impressed that he began introducing her to other businessmen in his circle, people who moved millions, who commanded established companies, but who sometimes found themselves lost in the face of complex financial challenges. Marianne entered a world she had never imagined reaching, not through the front door with degrees from expensive universities, but through the back door, brought in by the merit of her work. The boys were growing, and with them grew the complexity of Marianne's life. Gabriel was a cheerful, talkative child, curious about everything. He learned quickly, made friends easily, and had a smile that lit up any room. Raphael, on the other hand, was more reserved. With the hearing aids Marianne managed to buy with her savings, he could hear better, but he still faced communication challenges. The speech therapy sessions were expensive, but she never failed to take her son, cutting back on everything she could to ensure he had the proper treatment. Gabriel noticed the differences between himself and his brother, and with that childish sensitivity that sometimes surprises adults, became Raphael's protector. At school, he defended his brother from any teasing. At home, he helped his mother care for him, explaining things in a way Raphael understood better. Marianne watched all of this and felt her heart fill with pride and gratitude. Despite all the difficulties, she was raising 2 good, united boys who knew the value of love and family, and that, more than any professional success, was her greatest victory. Over time, her small consulting business grew organically. She didn't have a luxurious office or a large team. She worked from home, using the kitchen table as her office, serving clients by phone, and visiting companies when necessary. But her reputation was solid. Business owners knew that when Marianne Costa took on a project, results would follow. It was on one of these projects, working for a textile industry that was being sold, that she had an insight that would completely change her trajectory. While analyzing the company's numbers, she realized that the asking price was far below the business's real potential. The owners, already tired and lacking a vision for the future, just wanted to get rid of the burden. But Marianne saw opportunity where they saw only problems. She spent weeks thinking about, what if instead of just advising others to invest, she invested herself? She had some money saved, the result of years of hard work and strict saving. It wasn't much, but maybe it was enough to start. The idea scared and excited her at the same time. It would be a huge risk. She could lose everything. But she could also gain a lot. And she had learned in all these years of struggle that you don't build anything significant without taking risks. She talked to Mr. Henry, who in addition to being a client had become a sort of mentor. He listened to her idea attentively, and when she finished speaking, he smiled in that way that indicated he was thinking about something. I know a few people who might be interested in investing with you. If you put together a solid plan, I can make the introductions. Marianne worked on that plan for a whole month. She researched, analyzed, projected scenarios. When she finished, she had a document that showed exactly how she could turn undervalued companies into profitable investments. It wasn't about buying cheap and selling high quickly. It was about identifying real potential, making strategic adjustments, and creating genuine long-term value. The presentations Mr. Henry arranged were intimidating. Elegant rooms in high-end commercial buildings, men in expensive suits, conversations filled with financial jargon. Marianne felt out of place in that environment, conscious of her simple clothes and humble origins. But when she started talking about numbers, about strategies, about the market, all those superficial differences disappeared. She knew what she was talking about, and that was impossible to ignore. She secured 3 investors willing to bet on her. The initial amount was modest by their standards, but significant for her. With this capital, Marianne founded her own investment firm. It didn't have a fancy name or a luxurious headquarters. It was just her laptop, her experience, and a determination that nothing in the world could shake. At that moment, with her son sleeping in the next room and the city of New York pulsing outside with its infinite possibilities, Marianne realized she had found not just a way to survive, but to thrive. She had transformed the pain of abandonment, the loneliness of single motherhood, the challenges of raising a child with special needs into fuel to build something bigger than herself. And this was just the beginning. 5 years passed like a rushing river, carrying away the marks of time and transforming everything in its path. Marianne was now 32, and the boys were 7. Gabriel was in the 2nd grade at a private school she could now afford with her work. He was a smart boy who loved math and was always asking questions about everything. Raphael attended the same school, but also had special support classes. His hearing aids were modern now, and he was developing well despite the challenges. Marianne's investment firm had grown quietly but consistently. She operated with discretion, avoiding the spotlight, focusing on concrete results. She had a small team now, 2 brilliant financial analysts she had hired from a public university, a lawyer to handle legal matters, and an assistant who managed her schedule. She still worked from home a lot, but she had also rented a small commercial office in a discreet building in Astoria, not far from where she had lived with Andrew. Her portfolio included stakes in 8 different companies. Some were small, others medium-sized, but they all shared one characteristic. They had been undervalued by the market, and she had identified their real potential. With careful strategic interventions, she had helped each one to restructure and grow. The returns on investment were impressive, and her initial investors not only stayed, but considerably increased their stakes. Marianne developed her own method of analysis. She didn't just look at the cold numbers on a balance sheet. She investigated the company's culture, talked to employees, and understood the market in depth. This holistic approach set her apart from large consulting firms and investment funds, which often treated companies as mere Excel spreadsheets. It was on a Thursday afternoon, during a follow-up meeting with one of her invested companies, that she discovered something that made her stop. The meeting was with the CFO of a tech company in which she had a minority but growing stake. They were reviewing operational expenses when the CFO casually mentioned that they had hired a new strategic consulting firm to assist with expansion. "Which firm?" Marianne asked, flipping through the report. "Costa Nieves Consulting. It's a rising firm, focused on tech and innovation companies. The lead executive, Andrew Costa-Neves, has an interesting reputation in the market. Marianne's heart skipped a beat. The last name was no coincidence. She knew who Andrew Costa-Neves was. In recent years, she had avoided thinking about him, building high walls around that painful part of her past. But his name occasionally appeared in business news, always associated with terms like promising, ambitious, on the rise. She asked to see more information about the firm. In the following days, she discreetly began to investigate. What she discovered was both impressive and unsettling. Andrew had indeed built a solid career. After they separated, he had risen quickly in the company where he worked, becoming a manager, then a director. 3 years ago, he had decided to open his own consulting firm. Costa-Neves Consulting had grown fast, attracting important clients and building a reputation for efficiency. But what really caught Marianne's attention was something else. As she dug deeper, she discovered that several of Andrew's firm's clients were, in fact, companies where she had some kind of indirect involvement. Some were clients of other companies in her portfolio. Others bought services from suppliers she had helped restructure. The web of connections was complex and subtle, but undeniable. In other words, a significant part of Andrew's success depended, albeit indirectly, on the business ecosystem she had helped create and strengthen. The irony was so profound it was almost cruel. The man who had rejected her for considering her an obstacle to his social ascent was thriving, without knowing it, thanks to the structures she had built. Marianne spent days processing this discovery. She didn't feel anger exactly. It was something more complex, a mixture of disbelief and a kind of bitter, poetic justice. She decided to do nothing about it. It wasn't her role to control the city's business connections. She filed the information away in a mental drawer and tried to move on. Until, 3 months later, she received an elegant envelope in the mail. The paper was thick, expensive, with gold details. Inside, a wedding invitation. Andrew Costa-Neves and Patricia Albright Foster are pleased to invite you to celebrate their union. The date was set for 2 months from then, at a luxurious hotel on the Upper East Side. Marianne held the invitation, feeling the weight of the paper and the even greater weight of the memories it stirred. Why would Andrew invite her? They hadn't spoken in over 7 years. He had never asked about the children, never sent a cent, never shown the slightest interest. Why now, at the moment of celebrating his new marriage, would he include her on the guest list? The answer came a few days later when she received a call from a mutual acquaintance from when they were married. The woman, always a gossip, was eager to share the news. "Did you hear you got an invitation to Andrew's wedding?" she said, barely containing her excitement. "Patricia is the daughter of the owner of one of the biggest construction companies in New York. A very traditional family, you know. They say Andrew is doing everything to impress them. The wedding is going to be the event of the year." Marianne thanked her for the information and hung up. Now she understood. It wasn't about her. It would never be about her. It was about the image. Andrew was marrying an heiress and wanted to display a perfectly successful life. Inviting his ex-wife, showing that there were no hard feelings, that it was all just a phase he had moved past, was part of the performance. She tossed the invitation in a drawer and tried to forget. But the boys found out. Gabriel found the envelope while looking for something in the living room and read the contents. At 7, he already understood much more than Marianne would have liked. He and Raphael knew who Andrew was, although they had never met him. They knew he had abandoned them before they were born, and they had very clear opinions about it. "Mom, can we go to this wedding?" Gabriel asked one evening as they were having dinner at the kitchen table. Marianne almost choked on her food. "Why would you want to go?" "I want to see him," Gabriel said with the disarming frankness of children. "I want to see the man who abandoned us. I want him to see that we're okay, that we don't need him." Raphael, who was usually quieter, nodded in agreement. His gaze had a determination that Marianne recognized as a reflection of her own. She tried to dissuade them, explaining that it wouldn't be comfortable, that it might be better to leave the past in the past. But the more she talked, the more convinced the boys became that they needed to go. Not to cause trouble, but to prove something to themselves and to the man who had rejected them. Marianne spent sleepless nights pondering. Part of her wanted to protect her children from this exposure. Another part understood what they were seeking. It was about affirmation, about showing that they hadn't been broken by rejection. And maybe she needed that too, she realized. She needed to look Andrew in the eye as the woman she had become, and not as the abandoned wife she once was. She made a decision. They would go to the wedding, but not as victims seeking crumbs of attention. They would go as the strong, dignified people they were, showing that life had gone on and prospered without him. Before RSVPing, however, Marianne decided to do something her business instincts demanded. She thoroughly investigated the financial situation of Costa Nevis Consulting. She used her network of contacts, accessed public reports, and discreetly spoke with people in the industry. What she discovered was revealing. Andrew's firm looked prosperous on the outside, but it had serious structural weaknesses. Most of its revenue came from a handful of large clients. If it lost one or two of those contracts, the company would face severe difficulties. Furthermore, Andrew had gone into significant debt to keep up appearances. The luxurious office on Park Avenue, the imported cars, the designer clothes, it was all supported by a financial house of cards. Even more intriguing, Marianne discovered that the firm's most profitable client was a tech company she knew well. Very well, because she herself had been instrumental in the restructuring that allowed the company to grow to the point where it could hire expensive consultants, and maintaining that contract depended on recommendations and connections within a business circle in which she had considerable, though discreet, influence. The information made her think, not about revenge exactly. Marianne was not driven by a desire to destroy, but there was an opportunity to show a truth about real value versus appearances, about who really propped up the world Andrew so admired. In the following weeks, she prepared everything meticulously. She chose an elegant but sober dress from an American designer she valued. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed for attention, just understated class and quiet confidence. She had the boys get their hair cut at a good salon and bought them small suits that made them look like young gentlemen. She also took care of professional matters. She spoke with some strategic contacts, planted some seeds, prepared some documents. She wouldn't do anything rash or emotional. She would just make business decisions that should have been made some time ago. Oswald, who was now retired and spent his days looking after his grandsons while Marianne worked, watched everything with the quiet wisdom of someone who has seen a lot in life. "Are you sure about this, daughter?" he asked on the eve of the wedding. Marianne was in the living room, reviewing some papers while the boys slept. She looked up at her father and nodded. "I am, Dad. I'm not going to do anything wrong. I'm just going to show the truth, and I'm going to do it with my head held high." The old man smiled, proud. "You've become too strong, kid. Sometimes it even scares me. It was the pain that taught me, Dad. Every tear I shed planted a seed of strength. Now it's time to harvest." On the morning of the wedding, Marianne woke up early. She made breakfast for the boys, helped them get dressed, and carefully styled her own hair. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized as the same, one who had been abandoned pregnant 7 years ago. There were lines of worry on her face, marks of the daily struggle. But there was also something more: dignity, strength, purpose. The hotel where the wedding would take place was on the Upper East Side, one of those addresses that breathe money and tradition. Marianne arrived with the boys in a discreet but elegant car she had recently bought. It wasn't ostentation, it was simply appropriate. She could afford to arrive in style, and she would do it on her own terms. Upon entering the luxurious lobby with its crystal, chandeliers and gleaming marble floors, Marianne felt eyes turn to her. She recognized some faces from business events she had attended in recent years. Some knew who she was professionally, others just saw an elegant woman accompanied by 2 handsome boys. The ceremony was to take place in the hotel garden, followed by a reception in the main ballroom. Marianne found their seats and sat down with the boys on either side. Gabriel looked at everything with his characteristic curiosity, while Raphael observed in silence, processing the new environment with the intensity he always had. The music began. The guests stood up. The bride entered, beautiful in an elaborate white dress, walking down the aisle with a smile that seemed rehearsed. Then, It was the groom's turn. When Andrew appeared at the altar, Marianne truly saw him for the first time in years. He was older, of course, but also different. His face had a hardness that wasn't there before, an expression of calculated satisfaction. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, his posture erect, like someone who had conquered the world. The boys tensed beside her. Gabriel squeezed her hand. Marianne squeezed back, conveying security and love. The ceremony was long and pompous. Elaborate speeches about eternal love and partnership, delivered by a celebrant who was clearly accustomed to high-end weddings. Marianne listened with a neutral expression, betraying no emotion. When the bride and groom were finally declared husband and wife and walked back down the aisle, Andrew saw her. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that instant, Marianne saw a rapid sequence of emotions cross his face. Surprise, discomfort, and then curiosity. She held his gaze without smiling, showing nothing but absolute calm. The reception was in the main ballroom, decorated, with expensive flowers and elaborate arrangements. An orchestra played classical music, waiters circulated with French champagne, and tables were decorated with such care they looked like magazine sets. Everything screamed luxury and sophistication. Everything seemed calculated to impress. Marianne moved through the room with the boys, greeted a few acquaintances, and accepted a glass of champagne she didn't drink. She was there, present, but at the same time distant. An observer of a world that so fascinated Andrew, but to her was just surface without substance. It was during dinner that Andrew finally approached. He left the head table where he sat with the bride and her parents and walked over to where Marianne was seated with the boys. His face was a mask of professional cordiality, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Marianne, thank you for coming." His voice was controlled, polite, the voice of someone who has learned to perform in uncomfortable social situations. "Andrew," she replied with equal neutrality, "your sons, Gabriel and Raphael." The boys looked at the biological father they had never known. There was no love in their eyes, but there was dignity. They didn't shrink, they didn't look down. They simply observed, assessed, and decided that this man deserved neither their anger nor their respect. Andrew looked at the boys for a moment, appearing uncomfortable. Then he turned his attention back to Marianne. "Are you doing well? What are you working on these days?" It was a casual question, asked more out of social obligation than genuine interest. Marianne smiled slightly. "I have an investment firm. Small, discreet things. Nothing too impressive." The answer was deliberately vague. Andrew nodded, as if that confirmed some impression he had. That she had continued with a modest life, far from the glamour to which he had ascended. "That's good, I'm glad you found your way." The condescension in his voice was almost imperceptible, but it was there. Marianne wasn't bothered. She just smiled again and nodded. "Likewise, Andrew. Congratulations on your wedding." He said his goodbyes and returned to his place of honor. Marianne watched him go, walking with that overconfidence of someone who believes they have won at life. And then, calmly, she took an envelope from her purse. The envelope remained in Marianne's purse for most of the reception. She could feel it there, as if it weighed more than it should, carrying with it a decision that would change everything. But she waited. She waited for the right moment, because some things need to be done at the exact right time to have the proper impact. The boys ate from the elaborate buffet and were fascinated by the chocolate fountain. Gabriel asked questions about everything, from the decor to the orchestra's music. Raphael observed everything with that silent attention that was his trademark, processing every detail of the luxurious environment. Marianne made sure they were comfortable, happy, showing the world that they were well cared for and loved children. After dinner, when the speeches began, Marianne listened politely but without real interest. They were empty words from people who probably barely knew the bride and groom, exaggerated praise, wishes for eternal happiness, all the expected performance at events of that type. It was when the party was heading towards its peak, with people more relaxed from the champagne and music, that Marianne saw her opportunity. Andrew was momentarily alone near one of the ballroom windows, observing his guests with that look of satisfaction that seemed to have become permanent on his face. She approached with calm steps, her posture erect, her gaze firm. When she got close enough, he noticed her and managed a polite smile, the kind you give to distant acquaintances at social events. "Marianne," he said, "are you enjoying the party?" "It's very beautiful," she replied truthfully. "You must be very happy." "I am. I finally found someone who understands my world, who shares the same values. It's been a long road to get here." The words had a clear subtext, an implicit comparison he probably didn't even realize he was making. Marianne let it pass. She had more important things to address. "Andrew, I need to give you something. It's about business, but I thought it was appropriate to do it in person." She held out the envelope. He seemed surprised but took it, examining the elegant paper with the discreet logo of Marianne's firm stamped in the upper corner. "What's this?" "Documents related to the contract between your consulting firm and Tech Vision Solutions. I thought you should know personally." Andrew frowned, starting to look worried. Tech Vision was his most profitable client, responsible for nearly 40% of Costa Neves Consulting's annual revenue. He opened the envelope right there, pulling out the folded sheets and beginning to read. Marianne watched as his expression changed. First confusion, then growing comprehension, and finally a pallor that spread across his face like a shadow. The document was a formal notification. Tech Vision Solutions was terminating its contract with Costa Neves Consulting, effective immediately as permitted by the early termination clause. The justification was technical, professional, and legally sound. But the impact was devastating. Marianne had spent weeks preparing this move. She had spoken with the executives at Tech Vision, people she had worked with during the company's restructuring years before. She had presented solid arguments about why they needed to change their strategic direction, why a new approach would be more efficient. And she had offered better alternatives, more suitable connections, solutions that would genuinely benefit the company. It wasn't revenge, it was business. It was a professional decision based on careful analysis and the best interests of a company in which she had invested time and resources. But the timing was chosen with care. "What?" Andrew began, his voice hoarse. "What is this? You can't do this." "It's already done," Marianne said calmly. "The decision was made by Tech Vision's board. I just facilitated conversations and presented alternatives. The rest was their choice." "You," he paused, trying to process. "You're involved with Tech Vision? How? Since when?" "Since before you even knew they existed, Andrew. I helped build that company. I was a fundamental part of the restructuring that allowed them to grow to the point where they could hire expensive consulting firms like yours. And now they are following my recommendation to seek other strategic partners." She saw when full comprehension finally dawned. She saw the exact moment Andrew understood what it meant. Not just the loss of revenue, but the network of dependencies he never knew existed. How many? Other companies that hired him had some connection to Marianne's discreet but essential work. How many of his successes were, in fact, built on foundations she had helped establish? But there was more. Marianne took another document from her purse, this one already open, and showed it to him. "And this is a contract I signed yesterday. Silva and Rodriguez, your second largest client, is transferring their digital products portfolio to a consortium I'm helping to form. They found the proposal more aligned with their growth needs." The second piece of news was like a punch to the gut. Andrew held the papers with hands that were beginning to tremble, looking at the numbers, the signatures, the undeniable reality before his eyes. "You're destroying me," he said. And for the first time, Marianne heard something beyond arrogance in his voice. There was fear there and a helpless rage. "Why, because of the past? Is this revenge?" Marianne looked at him with a calmness that surprised even herself. She felt no triumph, no anger. She only felt an absolute clarity about who she was and what she represented. "It's not revenge, Andrew. It's a consequence. You abandoned me while I was pregnant because you thought I was an obstacle to your rise. You built a life and a career based on appearances and superficial connections. But true success, the kind that lasts, isn't built that way. It's built with serious work, with genuine value, with integrity. And it just so happens that without knowing it, you were dependent on structures I helped create, not because I planned it, but because I work seriously and build real things." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "For years you have indirectly prospered thanks to a business ecosystem I helped strengthen. And now I am simply making business decisions that should have been made long ago. It's not personal, it's professional. Something you should understand, considering how you handled our separation." Andrew was pale, the papers still in his hands, unable to form a response. Around them the party continued, music playing, people laughing, champagne flowing. No one noticed the silent earthquake that had just occurred in that corner of the ballroom. "The boys," he finally said. "Our sons. I want to get to know them better now. Can we talk about it?" Marianne felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it quickly passed. She knew that tactic. The attempt to humanize himself, to seek empathy when all other options were exhausted. "No, Andrew. You had 7 years to want to know your sons. You never reached out, never sent a cent, never showed the slightest interest. They are fine. They are incredible, strong, loving children, and they got here without you. I don't need your convenient fatherhood now that your life is falling apart." She took another step closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "But I want you to know one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because it was the right business decision, and because after everything I've been through, all the sleepless nights, all the sweat and tears to build something real, I have the right to make decisions based on what's best for the businesses where I have influence. If that impacts you, it's just a consequence of your own choices back then." She turned to leave, but stopped and looked at him one last time. "I wish you happiness in your marriage, Andrew, I really do. But even more, I wish that one day you understand that people are not disposable, that dignity can't be bought with an expensive suit, and that true success isn't measured by the size of your office or the address of your apartment. It's measured by what you build with your own hands and the peace you feel when you look in the mirror." She left him there, alone with his documents and his shattered reality. She walked back to where the boys were, took their hands, and calmly said it was time to go home. They left the hotel under the curious gazes of some guests who had noticed the intense conversation. Marianne held her head high, her shoulders straight, walking with the same elegance she had arrived with. She didn't look back, didn't try to see Andrew's reaction or anyone else's. She simply left, taking her children and her dignity with her. In the car on the way back home, Gabriel was the one who broke the silence. "Mum, what did you say to him?" Marianne looked in the rearview mirror, seeing her 2 boys' faces reflected there. She smiled slightly. "I told him the truth, that we are strong, that we built our lives with honest work, and that we don't need anyone who didn't want us when we needed them most." Raphael, who rarely spoke much, said in his soft voice, "I liked seeing him, Mom, but I didn't feel anything. It's like looking at a stranger." "That's right, son. He is a stranger, and that's okay. You have a family that loves you. You have your grandfather, you have me, and you have each other. That's more than enough." Gabriel nodded, then turned to look out the window. The lights of New York sped by, the city at night pulsing with life. After a few minutes, he spoke again. "Mom, when I grow up, I want to be like you, strong like that, someone who doesn't give up." Marianne felt her eyes burn with tears she refused to let fall. She reached a hand back, and Gabriel took it. On the other side, Raphael did the same. There in that moving car with her 2 sons holding her hands, Marianne felt she had won not just a battle, but the entire war. The following months brought changes. News of Costa Neves. Consulting's troubles spread discreetly through the market. Andrew tried to manage the situation, sought new clients, made promises and concessions. But once the first crack appears, others soon follow. Trust is like glass. Once broken, it's never quite the same. Marianne watched from a distance, without direct involvement. She felt no pleasure in his downfall, but she felt no remorse either. A natural balance was being established, an order being restored. And meanwhile, she had her own plans. For months, something had been germinating in her mind, an idea that took shape until it became a necessity. There were other women like her out there, women who had been left behind, abandoned with children, discarded, when they no longer served someone's purpose. Women who had talent, intelligence, strength, but lacked opportunities or guidance. Women who just needed someone to believe in them, the way Marianne wished someone had believed in her back then. The idea for the mentorship project began in a casual conversation with Mr. Henry, her former client and mentor. They were discussing investments when Marianne mentioned how many talented women she knew who were stuck in jobs that didn't value their potential. "Why don't you do something about it?" he asked. "You have resources now. You have knowledge. You have a network. You could make a real difference." And so she did. She created the Fresh Start Institute, a non-profit organization dedicated to offering business mentorship, training courses, and networking for women who were rebuilding their lives after difficult separations, widowhood, or other complicated transitions. The project started small, a group of 10 women meeting in a rented room in Astoria. Marianne shared her story without filters, without emotional makeup. She told them about the abandonment, the multiple jobs, the sleepless nights, the fears, and the victories, and she saw her own challenges reflected in the eyes of those women. She taught them everything she knew: how to analyze finances, how to identify opportunities, how to negotiate, how to build professional confidence. But more important than the technical skills, she taught something more fundamental: self-worth. She taught them that a person's value is not determined by who stayed or who left, but by what she chooses to build with her own hands. The program grew quickly. In 6 months, it had 50 participants. In a year, it began receiving donations from companies that recognized its social value. Marianne brought in other successful businesswomen to share their experiences. She created a support network where women who had been through hardship helped others who were just beginning their journeys. One of the first students in the program, a woman named Paula, who had been abandoned with 3 children and no formal qualifications, managed to start her own catering business after 6 months of mentorship. Another, Teresa, who had lived for years in an abusive relationship, discovered she had a talent for graphic design and now has a thriving agency. Each success story warmed Marianne's heart more than any business prophet ever could. Seeing those women reclaim their dignity, rebuild their lives, and prove to themselves that they were capable was the most profound validation she could imagine. On a Saturday afternoon, almost 2 years after Andrew's wedding, Marianne was at the Institute giving a lecture to a new group of participants. The boys were there too, helping to organize materials. Gabriel, now 9, loved talking to the women and asking about their projects. Raphael, quieter but equally involved, helped with the technical presentations on the computer. In the middle of her lecture, while explaining cash flow analysis, Marianne looked around the room. She saw women of all ages, backgrounds and stories. Some still carried the fresh pain of rejection in their eyes. Others already showed signs of the strength that was being born within them, and she realized that this was her true legacy. It wasn't the money she had accumulated, though it was important for providing security for her sons. It wasn't the companies she had invested in, though they were proof of her competence. It was these women, this support network, this living proof that it is possible to be reborn from the ashes, that pain can be transformed into strength, that rejection can become the fuel to build something greater. When she got home that night, she found her father sitting on the porch drinking coffee and looking out at the street. She sat down next to him, and they remained there in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "You'd be proud if you saw what I've built, Dad," Oswald smiled, putting his cup aside. "I'm already proud, daughter. I always have been, since the day you came back home with those suitcases and your growing belly. That day, I saw a woman determined not to give up, and everything that came after was just confirmation." Marianne rested her head on her father's shoulder, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. Inside, the boys were doing their homework, arguing over some math problem. The house was simple, but it was full of love and purpose. "You know, Dad, sometimes I still think about everything I went through, the rejection, the loneliness, the fear, and I wonder if it really had to hurt so much to get here." Oswald thought for a moment before answering. Maybe it wasn't necessary. But it happened, and you turned it into something beautiful. There are people now who won't go through what you went through alone. There are children who will grow up with stronger mothers because you shared your strength. That doesn't take away the pain you felt, but it gives it meaning. Marianne nodded. He was right. The pain had been real, deep, sometimes almost unbearable. But it hadn't defined her. It hadn't broken her. It had only molded her into something more resilient, more compassionate, more human. In the following weeks, Marianne learned through mutual acquaintances that Andrew was facing serious difficulties. His consulting firm survived, but it was much smaller. He had to close the luxurious office, lay off employees, and take on smaller projects. His marriage to Patricia was tense, according to the gossip, with her questioning his financial decisions and the future they had planned together. Marianne felt neither satisfaction nor pity, just a kind of serene indifference. Andrew had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences, just as she had made hers and built her own path. What moved her now had nothing to do with him. It was about the women at the Institute. It was about her sons growing up strong and kind. It was about proving every day that true value is not measured in appearances or status, but in character and impact. On a sunny October morning, Marianne was making breakfast when she received a call. It was from a major New York business magazine. They wanted to do a feature on the Fresh Start Institute, and on her. She hesitated at first, always preferring discretion. But she thought of the women who could be reached if the story was told, of those who didn't yet know that help was available. She accepted the interview, and when the article was published weeks later with the headline "Resilience in Action," how a single mother built an empire and a legacy of hope, Marianne felt that a cycle had finally closed. The photo they chose for the cover wasn't of her in some elegant office or in front of a corporate building. It was of her at the Institute, surrounded by some of the women from the program, with her boys in the background organizing materials. It was real, it was honest, it was exactly who she was. Andrew saw the article. She knew this because he tried to get in touch, for the first time in years. He sent a short message, asking to talk. Marianne read it, thought for a few moments, and then deleted it without replying. There was nothing to say. That page had been turned a long time ago. What mattered now was right there, in her modest but love-filled home, in the boys who were growing up healthy and secure, in the women who were rebuilding their lives with dignity, in the legacy she was building brick by brick. One night, as she was putting the boys to bed, Gabriel asked a question that took her by surprise. "Mom, are you happy?" Marianne thought about the answer. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had achieved, everything she still wanted to do, and she answered with absolute sincerity. "I am, son. Very happy. Because I've learned that happiness isn't about having everything, but about valuing what you have. And I have you too. I have a job I love. I have the chance to help other people. That's more than enough." Gabriel smiled, satisfied with the answer. Raphael, already half asleep, murmured a good night that came from the bottom of his heart. Marianne left the room and went to the living room window. She looked out at the city, New York with its infinite lights, its dreams and disillusions, its promises and pitfalls. It was in this city that she had known love, experienced the most painful rejection, hit rock bottom, and then been reborn. And she realized she wouldn't change a thing. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair had been necessary to transform her into the woman she was today. The pain had taught her empathy. The struggle had taught her strength. The loneliness had taught her self-sufficiency. And all of it together had made her capable of helping others walk the same path with a little less pain. Because that was the true meaning of success, Marianne understood. It's not about winning alone, but about extending a hand to those who come after. It's not about accumulating power, but about sharing strength. It's not about erasing the past, but about illuminating it so that others don't stumble on the same stones. And that night, with the city quiet and her sons sleeping safely in their rooms, Marianne made a final promise to herself. She would keep building. She would keep helping. She would keep proving every day that a person's true worth is not in where they started or who rejected them, but in who they chose to become and how many lives they touched along the way. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Marianne and Andrew has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of resilience, overcoming, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this narrative. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that true strength is born from difficulties and that self-love is the foundation of any achievement. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to start over, that pain can be transformed into wisdom, and that no one defines our worth but ourselves. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will move and inspire you.